Thank you, Madam Speaker. I ask unanimous consent to give all members 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend their remarks and include any extraneous material during this special hour.
Without objection.
Madam Chair, I rise this afternoon to hold this special order on a very important issue. It's an issue about abortion access in the military. I thank my colleagues for joining me in elevating their voices on the experience of our troops who are terrified that they will be stationed in a state where they cannot control their bodies. The Supreme Court decision in Dobbs overturned 50 years of precedent recognizing the constitutional right to an abortion. The court stated that their opinion merely returned the issue of abortion rights to the states and that women can vote for whom they wish to represent their values. But service members don't have that right. They don't get to choose where they live. This leaves 230,000 servicewomen who could be ordered to a state that forces them to stay pregnant even under circumstances where they have been raped. Because that's what some of the states in this grand union have decided is the law of the land in their state. Let me tell you that this is going to have profound impacts on the issues that really are of great concern to us who oversee the military right now. Recruitment is down, retention is a problem, and readiness is a problem. That's only going to be exacerbated by having the situation where these servicewomen who become pregnant are going to have to travel long distances to get an abortion. Access to abortion has long been a struggle for women in the military, especially those overseas and our junior enlisted with lower incomes. The Dobbs decision has just made matters worse. This map right here shows all the states in red that have basically prohibited abortions for all intents and purposes. Now, 1 in 4 women will have an abortion sometime during their reproductive years. We now look at the fact that women in the military have a 22% higher incidence of unintended pregnancies than women who are in the civilian world. So now let's look at this. There are actually 128 military installations in these red states. Of those 128 installations that will prohibit abortion, 80,000 service women are in bases in those states. The vast majority of those women are of childbearing age. Now, the RAND study that was recently commissioned estimated that there are 4,000 service women every year that are getting abortions. Now, of those 4,000 women, service women who will get abortions, 40% of them are in states that have severely restricted or no access to abortion. Now, look at this. You have a situation, if you're in Louisiana or Mississippi, look how far you're going to have to travel, how many states you're going to have to travel through to get to a blue state where you can access an abortion. Privates in the military make about $2,000 a month. Most of the abortions will happen to young service members. A typical cost, not including travel, to get the medication abortion is $568. To have a first trimester Procedural abortion, it's $625. And a second trimester abortion is $775. For a service member who must travel for an abortion, for example, from the state of Texas to Kansas, let's say, with a 2-night stay in a hotel, the expected cost is $1,100 or more. That's almost half of the monthly salary for a typical junior enlisted service member. You know, in July, we had the very first hearing ever in the House Armed Services Committee on abortion access. 2 courageous active duty women who have served in the military, each for over 20 years. So they have excelled. They are officers in the military or non-commissioned officers in the military. And they have been so good that they've been retained in the military and promoted. Let me tell you their stories. Teresa spoke of how her abortion as a junior enlisted enabled her 20-year career in the Air Force. She used her entire paycheck to cover the cost of the abortion, and her next paycheck to reimburse her friend for the gas money for driving her to the facility. Another service member, whose name is Sharon, spoke of getting an abortion because she wasn't ready to have another child. Let's remember that 59% of the women who get abortions in this country are already mothers. I was one of them. She and her partner were going to drive to Georgia, but then they learned it had a mandatory waiting period law. So then they ended up traveling all the way to New York City. And she accredits that abortion for her 24 years of active duty in the military. Now, I have more to say, but I'm going to yield now to my great colleague, who is one of the co-chairs of the Democratic Women's Caucus, and access her how much time she may consume.
Thank you. You want me to go here? Okay. I'm going to use my poster.
Yours is over here. Yours is different.
You can hold. Hey, who wants to hold this? Are you going to hold this? You want to hold it? You want me to have someone hold it? Okay. Sorry about that. Thank you, Madam Speaker. And thank you, Congressman Speier, for yielding and for your great leadership on this issue and so many that affect our women in the military. I also want to start with a shout out to Congressman Takano and Brownlee for their work on getting veterans the health care they need. Congressman Speier, I join you and millions of Americans who believe that a woman should be able to make her own decision about her reproductive care, her life, and her future. And here's the thing. Abortion is health care, and the decision to seek an abortion is deeply personal. It's a decision that should be made by a woman with her doctor or with people she trusts, not by politicians, not by the governors, not by a state legislature, people who have no insight into her circumstance. And today, we're taking the opportunity to focus on the importance of reproductive freedom for members of our military. And I believe, as you pointed out, there's over 200,000 active women service members that serve our nation, 80,000 residing in the over 100 military bases in this country, bases dominated by men. And most of these women are young, they're fresh out of high school or college, they've never been away from home, and they have hopes and dreams, and they're filled with pride and excitement. And sadly, they're entering an environment where sexual assault is rampant. And just ask Sarah, who was stationed at Fort Hood, Texas. This was just a few years ago. She was raped at a party attended by military personnel. At that point, in those days, she was able to opt for an abortion, and she was able to drive. She had been at Fort Hood, Texas. She was able to drive to a Planned Parenthood nearby. But now that the Republican-controlled Supreme Court has made a dastardly That's sort of a polite way to express it. Dastardly decision to restrict access to abortion, what would be the option for Sarah or any of the women stationed in American bases where the states have either banned or restricted abortion? And I have a similar map, Representative Speier, to the one you showed. So the dark-colored, where there's dark colors on the state, I'll call it red. I'm going to call it Magna Red. The Magna Red states. And those are states that either have banned or are restricting or severely restricting or in the process of restricting access to abortion. There's about 27 of those in this country. And take a look, those little dots, black dots, that represents the military bases in this country. And just take a look. I'm going to have to, Madam Speaker, move to my map. What if you're in a base? If you're based deep in Texas, in Mississippi, Alabama, even in Florida, where do you go? Where do you go? The map tells a story. So we know that Sarah would have had to drive 9 hours from Fort Hood just to get to New Mexico. And make no mistake, Madam Speaker, make no mistake that the Republican-appointed Supreme Court, the Magna Republican state legislatures, have declared a war on women. So we're here today, we're saying this. Our patriotic women, they leave their homes, their family, and their friends to serve our country. They signed up to be pilots and engineers and medics, not forced pregnancy forced by Magna Republicans. We trust them with Black Hawks, with firearms, logistics. We must trust them to make their own medical decisions about their lives and give them access to the health care they deserve. They are standing up for our freedom, and we must stand up for theirs. And with that, I yield back.
I thank the gentlewoman for her powerful comments. You know, on top of everything else, we passed one law, which was the Hyde Amendment, which said you can't use federal funds for medical abortion. So Medicaid was not made available for that purpose. But many states have decided to cover it anyway. But that wasn't enough for the Congresses some years ago. They decided that we would ban any abortion at a military treatment facility except for rape, incest, and the life of the mother. So that means a service member can't go to the military treatment facility on their base, get the abortion, and pay for it themselves. We make them jump through hoop after hoop after hoop. And then we ask ourselves, why do we have a recruitment problem? I think it's pretty obvious. So now I want to yield to my colleague on the HAS committee and on the Military Personnel Subcommittee and a former service member to comment on this issue as well. Congresswoman Houlihan from the state of Pennsylvania.
Thank you. Yes, over here. Madam Speaker, as a former servicewoman and a veteran myself, I rise today in support of our current and future servicewomen and their fundamental freedoms. The Dobbs decision has already had a devastating effect on women across this country. According to a recent RAND study, 37% of servicewomen who were pregnant within the year of the study had an unintended pregnancy. Now, nearly half of all active duty servicewomen live in states that have severely curtailed abortion access. And this is devastating, of course. Access to abortion care is essential to a woman's health, and it's central to her economic and social well-being. Servicewomen who live in states that have banned or restricted abortion now must incur the expenses that are necessary to travel to receive medical care, and they must now go to their commands to ask for permission to travel. Their military personnel records are automatically updated in a system showing that they are pregnant. Pregnant service women are afforded no medical privacy, and they face the knowledge that their colleagues and their commanders will know if they have to travel to seek an abortion. With this vital health care out of reach for some and far too difficult to access for others, the consequences are widespread and they are tangible, not just to women's lives, but to this nation. Our military readiness, our retention, our recruitment are all in jeopardy. Our service members put their lives on the line every day defending our freedoms, and now we must clearly defend theirs. For military and many, military service is not only a call to serve a purpose greater than themselves, but it is also, frankly, a path to economic stability and to educational opportunities. To those who say that this is a theoretical argument, let me tell you the story of a fellow airman, an airwoman. Air Force Major Teresa Mazzillo from our Commonwealth of Pennsylvania just reached the milestone of 20 years of military service. Her promotion to Lieutenant Colonel is just in a couple months, and I want to extend my gratitude and congratulations on her receiving this tremendous milestone, reaching this tremendous milestone. As a result of the Dobbs decision, she bravely came forward and she shared this with us. When she was a junior enlisted service member, making only $550 every 2 weeks and living in the dorms, she had an abortion. She was 21 years old and joined the Air Force for the economic and educational opportunities it provided, like many people do. Safe and legal access to an abortion allowed her to continue her military service and her training commitments without disruption. This decision to utilize vital reproductive health care helped her to establish a dedicated career in our military and to serve this great nation. A decision that today might no longer be hers to make. A decision that will no longer be available to the 84,000 servicewomen and thousands of spouses and military family members who live in states where safe access to abortion is now illegal or severely restricted. Today, over 42% of the military is comprised of our most junior service members, and today, most junior enlisted service members make a little over $2,000 a month. Can you imagine being forced to become a parent when you only make a little over $2,000 a month, live in a dormitory with no economic support, no established housing, and likely no family nearby, and looming military obligations as well? As I mentioned, I'm a very proud Air Force veteran, in fact, a third-generation member of the military. My military service was pivotal to my own personal and professional growth, and I rely on lessons I learned in active duty service and as the child of an active duty member every single day of my life. We must ensure that women continue to have opportunities to serve in our military without losing control of their own bodies. We must ensure that every service woman is afforded the same privacy and bodily autonomy as her peers are. We must ensure that every service woman and military family member has safe and legal access to abortion care, regardless of where they're stationed. The economic consequences of being forced to become a parent are, for many, insurmountable. Regardless of a woman's reason to end a pregnancy, we cannot simply abide by an environment where a service woman is given less bodily autonomy than her male counterpart is. Women are a vital part of our military. In our renewed strategic environment and with ongoing recruitment and retention challenges across the military, we simply cannot afford to discourage women from entering military service in service of this nation. And we must remember that no one has the right to interfere with a person's ability to make decisions about their own health and their own well-being. So I ask my colleagues to stand with me and with many of us here on the dais today on behalf of our nation's service women. With that, I thank you, Madam Chair, and I yield back.
I thank the gentlewoman for her service then and for her service now. You know, her comments about young service women just out of high school or college who find themselves pregnant and seek an abortion reminds me of a story that I heard at a base here in the United States of a young single mother servicewoman who was struggling to take care of her young daughter, in part because the child care, she was lucky enough to have child care at that particular base. Many of our bases are impacted with long waiting lists, but she actually had a slot. But the child care center didn't open until 6 o'clock, and she had to be at physical training and exercises at 5:30. So she was always juggling that situation. Imagine if you're not even prepared to have a child and you're forced to give birth to that child and have to cope with all those additional issues as well. With that, let me offer another colleague on the Military Personnel Subcommittee and a fellow Californian, a great member of our freshman class, Congresswoman Sarah Jacobs from the great state of California, to consume how much time as she seems appropriate.
Well, thank you, Chairwoman Speier, for your leadership today and your leadership on this issue. It has been truly incredible to learn and serve under you. I'm so proud to represent San Diego's vibrant and diverse military community in Congress and on the House Armed Services Committee. And when I go home and talk to my constituents, they ask me what I'm doing to make sure their loved ones are taken care of, that they're going to be safe, not just when they're deployed abroad, but when they're here at home. And I have to look these families in the eye and tell them that right now, their loved ones who do so much to serve and sacrifice for our country will not necessarily have safe housing, affordable childcare, and quality health care, including reproductive health care. We owe our service members so much more. Because even though they volunteered to serve in our armed services, they didn't volunteer to give up their reproductive rights. Decisions about if, when, and how to have a family belong to our service members, not the Supreme Court or elected officials. And taking away these fundamental rights doesn't just hurt these individuals. It hurts our military readiness, recruitment and retention, and morale, putting our national security in jeopardy. With 40% of active duty servicewomen having very limited or zero access to abortion services where they're stationed, our military's ability to adapt to evolving conflicts and challenges is severely compromised. I'm proud to be from California, where abortion is currently safe and legal. But not everyone is lucky enough to be stationed in California. As of July, about 84,000 service women were stationed at a base located in a state with a trigger law, and with new abortion bans going into effect, that number will only grow. No matter where you live or are stationed, no matter how much money you make, you should have access to abortion. And the truth is that none of us can take our existing state laws for granted, because a Republican majority in Congress or a Republican president will push for a national abortion ban. And this isn't even a secret. They literally already introduced it. And we also need to remember that even before the Supreme Court took away our constitutional right to abortion, service members faced huge barriers to accessing necessary reproductive health care. DoD already couldn't provide or pay for abortions in most circumstances, and service members looking for care off base were limited by restrictions on travel. And after jobs, abortion access is even harder for service members. They can't freely take off days from work, and many can't afford to travel the thousands of miles and pay out of pocket to receive the care they need and deserve. This is unacceptable. We have a responsibility to ensure our service members have access to the care they need. That's why I joined my friend Congresswoman Speier to introduce the March for Service Members Act, which would allow military medical treatment facilities to provide abortion services and permit the military to cover the associated cost. And it's why I'm proud to be an original co-sponsor of the Access to Reproductive Care for Service Members Act, introduced this week by Congressman Crow and Congresswoman Speier. This crucial legislation would ensure that leave requests to seek an abortion are confidential and approved without delay, and push to have DoD provide travel reimbursement for those seeking abortion care. None of these solutions are radical. They're not extreme. All they do is empower and support our service members to make their own healthcare decisions. And when we've already asked our service members to put their lives on the line for our freedom, we cannot and should not take away theirs. Thank you so much, Madam Chair. I yield back.
I thank the gentlewoman for her outstanding comments and for her great leadership that she has already demonstrated. I now would like to invite my colleague from the state of Massachusetts, Congressman Seth Moulton, a great American leader who has served his country a number of ways in a number of situations, certainly in the military and now as a member of Congress.
Well, I want to thank my colleague from California for her incredible leadership on this and so many other issues on the House Armed Services Committee. You've truly built a legacy which will be hard to repeat. So thank you. Signing up for the military is a sacrifice. In return, our service members should never have to worry about their own health care being criminalized by the very country they have volunteered to defend. But for an estimated 5,000 to 7,400 active duty service members and DoD civilians who find themselves in need of an abortion each year, this is exactly what could happen. Thousands serve in states they did not choose. Many of these places now deem abortion a criminal act. So what happens next? Many of my colleagues would just simply suggest take leave and travel to a state that provides abortions. Are we going to force service members to disclose a sexual assault to justify leave? What about those who aren't authorized to travel due to training status? What about women with complications who need emergency services? 40% of active duty service women in the U.S. could now be faced with significant challenges accessing critical health care in the wake of the Dobbs decision. 40%. And let me be clear, there will be an operational impact on military recruitment and retention. The Department of Defense must defend all of its service members. We entrust these brave young Americans with the toughest life and death decisions. We ought to trust them to make their own health care decisions, too. This is not only a human right, but it is a matter of national security. Yield back.
I thank the gentleman for those outstanding comments. Another member who has shown incredible leadership on the House Armed Services Committee. I now welcome my good friend and colleague on the House Armed Services Committee, who again has shown leadership in the military, in service, and in Congress as well, and the author of the recently minted bill to provide greater protections for service women. I yield to Jason Crow from Colorado.
Thank you, Representative Speier. Madam Speaker, I rise in absolute fury today over what's going on to American women in this horrific decision by the Supreme Court to take away a fundamental right for the first time in our nation's history, to take away a fundamental right from millions of American women. Egregious enough in its own right that this has happened, we compound it with the fact that the tens of thousands of women who have stood up to answer our nation's call, to raise their right hand, to take the oath, to give their life for this country, to defend our freedoms, now don't have the same freedoms themselves. What is going on in this country? I served this country as an Army Ranger, 3 combat tours in Iraq and Afghanistan. I served with my fellow men and women. I now sit in this body. I sit on the Armed Services Committee with my good friend Jackie Speier, where we now make policy that impacts the very privates that I used to be. I remember what it was like being Private Crow, sitting in those boots, having to live with the consequences of the decisions made under this dome. And I think about that now. I think about all the young women who want to serve. Maybe they want to follow in the footsteps of their mother or their grandmother. Maybe they are deeply patriotic people and they want to give back to their country. Maybe they're trying to pursue better opportunities and get some money for college. Whatever the motivation, they stand up and they take the same oath that I took and the same oath that millions of others have taken over our nation's history. And it's an oath that says you're willing to give your life and put it all on the line for your fellow countrymen and women. And now we are asking those women to not just be willing to give their life in defense of our nation, but to do so in a way that sets aside their own fundamental rights and their own freedoms and gives them second-class citizenship in the process of doing it. What is going on in this country and in this capital? We know that abortion care is a time-sensitive and necessary procedure. And we know that if service members can't access this necessary health care, that their very own health is in jeopardy. So let's just take a minute, let's just set aside the moral arguments, let's just park those for a minute, and just talk about military readiness. Let's talk about the defense of this nation that people love to talk about here in this capital. Support the troops. Tie a yellow ribbon around the tree. All right. How about we actually do right by the people that are willing to make those sacrifices? Service members don't have a choice of where they go to serve. That's part of the deal. You raise your right hand, you go to boot camp, you get trained on your job, and you go where the nation needs you. Are we really going to send thousands of women to places where they don't have rights and they can't access health care? How is that in the interests of our force? How does that create a healthy, productive, vibrant military? How is that good for recruiting? Well, it's not, obviously. It's not often where we just have an issue and it's just so egregiously abusive to people who are trying to do the right thing. It's not often where we're literally in a position of dissuading young men and women from serving this nation and making it harder for them to do it and making it harder for our military to recruit them. That's why I've been proud to work with Jackie Speier. We started this effort by co-leading together the March for Service Members Act. And then we talked to folks, we held roundtables, we held discussions, and we knew that just wasn't going to do it. That wasn't enough. We had to do more. And that's why we drafted and are pursuing this legislation, the Access to Reproductive Care for Service Members Act, which will require commanders to approve leave for abortion care automatically. It'll make DoD reimburse service members for the cost of travel to receive care, and it guarantees privacy protections for service members against retaliation from commanding officers and peers. Imagine that, being retaliated against by your commanding officer. Well, that should be illegal, and we're going to try to make it illegal. Folks, until we can pass a national law protecting abortion care and abortion rights for women, which we're going to try to do, and we're going to have to get rid of the filibuster to do it in the Senate. Until we do that, we're going to do everything possible to protect everybody we can. And now, today, it's going to continue with us protecting our service women. They're willing to give everything for us. The least we can do is have their back. We must pass this bill. I implore my fellow members to walk the talk. Don't just talk about supporting our service members. Do it. This is the way to do it. We can and must do this. We must have their back. Let's get this done. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman for really powerful remarks. You know, this issue doesn't have to be that hard. But because of legislation that has been passed previously, it has made it incredibly difficult. I'm going to just share with you now the stories of healthcare professionals who have provided care to these military service women. You've heard from my colleagues about some of the service members' stories, I'm now going to tell you about two abortion providers. One who is active duty and the other one who is a civilian provider, but who spends the majority of her career close to military installations and provides services to our servicewomen. The active duty provider, Dr. LeMay, had to tell a young woman that her child would not live more than a few minutes following birth due to fetal abnormalities. Yet, there was nothing she could do but hope that the young woman could afford the care she wanted and deserved off base. She could not even provide her abortion counseling. She had to kind of hint about it. This particular patient had to hold a fundraiser. Now think about this. This is a servicewoman who is sworn to put her life on the line for her country. She's in a foreign destination, and she's holding a fundraiser to raise the funds to fly back to the United States and to get her abortion. Just imagine having to ask your friends and family for that money because the military you have dedicated your life to has failed you. She should have been able to get that abortion at a military treatment facility. And until we can lift the Hyde Amendment, yes, make her pay for it, but don't make her have to develop a GoFundMe page to get the resources to fly to a destination that actually covers abortions. Another provider, the civilian provider, Dr. Moyetti, shared her experience of literally watching her patient count quarters to pay for her abortion. And her patient opted to go without sedation to terminate a pregnancy because she couldn't afford any more out-of-pocket costs. There is nothing humane, nothing respectful about treating servicewomen like this. Now, if it's the intention of the military to, force women out of the military, to create an all-male force, then maybe this is the way to go. Maybe this is what they had in mind. But we do know that we need women in the force. We know that there's a small percentage of men and women who are eligible to serve in the military because of their abilities or lack thereof. So it's a small percentage to begin with, and a smaller yet that choose to serve. So 20% of the military now is made up of female service members. We only see that number growing in order to have a ready service to be able to go to war when necessary. But now we're doing things that are discouraging women to even contemplate becoming a member of the service. Under current law, the DoD is prohibited from providing or paying for abortions except in cases of rape, incest, or a threat to the mother's life. These exceptions are so very narrow and interpreted so narrowly that the DoD has confirmed to me that the number of abortions that have been done at military treatment facilities in a year is between 11 and 21. Now, the RAND study purports that there's probably 4,000 women in service in this country, in the various services, that get an abortion every year. Only 11 to 21 of them are done at military treatment facilities. That means 3,980 women in the service have to pay for and also go elsewhere to seek that service. They have to pay out of pocket not only for the care they need, but also for other expenses, including lodging, gas, airfare, and childcare. The Dobbs decision will no doubt exacerbate these challenges, forcing service members to travel longer distances and shoulder greater financial burdens. That is if they are granted leave in the first place. Imagine you are assaulted, you want to go get an abortion, you're in the state of Texas, you have to go to your commander and seek leave. And by the way, if you seek leave and you are raped and you have a police report, they might let you have that leave without having your docked for it. But if you're not one of those women who has been raped or the victim of incest, but did in fact get pregnant and want to terminate, and you have to go to your commander in Texas, you right now have to divulge the service you're asking for, and you're going to get docked in leave as well. It is inhumane to force women to remain pregnant against their will. It's just fundamental to freedom to be able to have control over your own body. It's arrogant to think that we know better than a woman and her doctor about what's best for her body. It is wrong to create government-mandated pregnancies. And it's wrong for the military to require its servicewomen to jump through so many hoops and spend so much money out of pocket because we have some antiquated law in the book that says you can't get an abortion at an MTF, a military treatment facility. Access to abortion care is essential to women's health and central to their economic and social well-being. The ability to access abortion should not depend on how much money you have, where you live, or where you're stationed. That's why I, along with my colleagues, have introduced the March for Service Members Act to enable DoD to provide abortion care once and for all. At the very least, service women should be able to access abortion care within MTFs and pay out of pocket just like they can for other procedures. The military does not cover IVF, but they will perform IVF at a military facility, and you will just pay for the residual cost. I'm proud to co-lead the Access to Reproductive Care for Service Members that my good friend Congressman Jason Crow just referenced, which would require DoD to pay any travel expenses associated with an abortion and ensure service members are able to take leave for their care. You know, there's a part of me that says that we have 128 bases and installations in these red states, in these states that ban abortion. Maybe we should just move these bases. Now, that's highly unlikely because we've invested so much, but it just begs the question about what are we really all about if we're going to treat these servicewomen so poorly. You know, my office has been inundated with outreach from former and current service members who are anxious and despondent about being stationed in what they're referring to as forced pregnancy states. One Army psychiatrist said to me, "Even I and some of my female physician peers in the military, with the relative privilege of being officers and physicians, fear someday receiving orders to a state which has banned abortion. Because of the increased maternal mortality in areas without access to safe and legal abortion, I would not feel safe attempting to become pregnant in such a state." Let me repeat that. This is a medical professional in the military who says, "I would not feel safe attempting to become pregnant in such a state." Again, at a time when the military is struggling with recruitment and retention, these bans make things worse. We must act now to provide the right resources at the right time and the right place so that service members and their families who have no choice about where they live continue to have access to the full reproductive care they need, want, and deserve. You know, these men and women who serve are our greatest patriots. Are we really going to treat them as second-class citizens? These members of the military defend our freedoms, and we are going to defend them. With that, Madam Speaker, I yield back the balance of our time.